In the heart of Central Florida, a story unfolded that would forever change the lives of a family and grip an entire community. This is the tragic case of Justis Garrett, a 16-year-old girl whose bright future was stolen in an act of unimaginable betrayal. It was April 13, 2018, a seemingly ordinary Friday morning in Lake County. Justis Garrett, a student at Mount Dora High School, was supposed to be starting her day like any other teenager. She was described by those who loved her as a vibrant and caring soul, full of laughter and dreams, had her whole life ahead of her. But on that day, something went terribly wrong. Justis was last seen being dropped off for school, but she never walked through its doors. She vanished. The next day, a deep sense of dread settled over her family. Her mother, Allison, reported her missing, sparking a desperate search that would quickly escalate. The community rallied, holding on to hope, sharing her photo, and praying for her safe return. Flyers with her smiling face appeared across Lake and Volusia Counties. Friends and classmates held their breath, waiting for any news. But as the days ticked by, the hope began to fade, replaced by a growing fear. The question on everyone's mind was simple, yet terrifying. Where was Justis? 5 agonizing days after she disappeared, the search came to a devastating end. On April 18th, a group of hikers walking through a remote, wooded area off Gasoline Road in Dillon, about 30 miles from her school, made a horrifying discovery. They found human remains. The news sent a shockwave through the community. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement was called in, and forensic analysis soon confirmed everyone's worst fears. The remains belonged to 16-year-old Justis Garrett. The vibrant, smiling girl from the flyers was gone. The community's hope turned to grief. Candlelight vigils were held, where friends, family, and even strangers gathered to mourn. They shared stories of Justis, remembering her kindness, her infectious laugh, and the warmth she brought to their lives. They tried to make sense of a senseless act, grappling with the sudden and violent loss of a young life that had barely begun. Her high school was draped in sorrow, as students and teachers tried to process the loss of one of their own. With the tragic discovery of Justis's body, the case shifted from a missing persons investigation to a full-blown homicide. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement, or FDLE, took the lead, launching an intensive investigation to find her killer. Who would do this to a 16-year-old girl? Detectives began meticulously piecing together the final hours of her life. They pored over phone records, scoured her social media accounts, and re-interviewed everyone who had seen or spoken to her in the days leading up to her disappearance. One person's story in particular began to raise red flags. That person was Robert Kern Jr, a 40-year-old man who was in a relationship with Justis's mother. Kern was the one who claimed he had driven Justis to school on the morning of April 13th. He told investigators he dropped her off at Mount Dora High and watched her walk toward the campus. It was a simple, straightforward account. But as detectives dug deeper, his story started to crumble. The first major inconsistency came from digital forensics. Investigators analyzed the data from Justis's cell phone. The phone's location data told a very different story from the one Kern was telling. On the morning she disappeared, her phone didn't ping anywhere near her high school. Instead, its last known location was tracked to an area in Volusia County, the same county where her body was later found. This was a critical piece of the puzzle. It directly contradicted Kern's claim that he had left her safely at school in Lake County. This digital trail put Robert Kern squarely in the investigators' crosshairs. Why would he lie about where he dropped her off? Detectives began to scrutinize his every move, his every statement. They found more inconsistencies in his accounts of that morning. As the pressure mounted, the web of lies he had constructed began to unravel. The evidence, both digital and circumstantial, was all pointing in one direction. It led them to believe that Robert Kern, the man who was supposed to be a trusted figure in the family, was not just a witness, but the primary suspect in her murder. For years after Justis's death, in 2022, the case finally went to trial. Robert Kern Jr. stood before a Volusia County jury, charged with the abduction and murder of the teenage girl who had once been part of his household. The courtroom was filled with tension as prosecutors laid out their case over several weeks. They painted a chilling picture of what they believed happened on that fateful day in April 2018. The state argued that Kern never took Justis to school. Instead, they alleged he abducted her, drove her to that secluded wooded area in Dillon, and there he committed the most heinous of acts. The prosecution presented evidence suggesting he had sexually assaulted and then murdered her, leaving her body in the woods to be discovered by chance. They detailed the cell phone data that placed Justis in Volusia County, not at her school. They highlighted the inconsistencies in Kern's statements to law enforcement, arguing that he repeatedly lied to cover his tracks. Kern's defense attorneys fought back, trying to cast doubt on the prosecution's narrative. They questioned the interpretation of the evidence and challenged the timeline presented by the state. They argued that while Kern may have been present, the full story was more complicated. The jury listened intently to months of testimony from law enforcement officers, forensic experts, and people who knew both Justis and Kern. They were tasked with weighing the evidence and deciding the fate of the man accused of this terrible crime. After deliberating, the jury delivered its verdict. They found Robert Kern Jr. guilty. He was convicted of first-degree felony murder and tampering with evidence. The verdict brought a wave of relief and solemn finality to the courtroom. For Justis's family and friends, it was the moment they had been waiting for long years for. It wasn't a celebration, but a confirmation that the man responsible for their pain would be held accountable. The judge handed down the mandatory sentence for his crimes, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice, in the legal sense, had been served. Kern would spend the rest of his life behind bars, ensuring he could never harm anyone again. The sentence was a firm statement that such a brutal betrayal of trust and life would not go unpunished. But for the family of Justis Garrett, the story doesn't end with a prison sentence. A guilty verdict can close a legal chapter, but it can never heal the wound of losing a child. The grief remains. The what-ifs linger. What if she had made it to school that day? What dreams would she have pursued? What kind of woman would she have become? These are questions that will forever haunt those who loved her. The community, too, carries the scar of this tragedy. It serves as a dark reminder of the vulnerability of youth and the evil that can hide in plain sight, even within a family circle. Yet, through the darkness, the memory of Justis Garrett endures. She is remembered not for the tragedy of her death, but for the light of her life. In quiet moments of remembrance, in the stories shared by friends, and in the enduring love of her family, her spirit lives on. Her story is a heartbreaking cautionary tale, but it is also a testament to a community's fight for justice and the unending power of memory. A life taken far too soon, but a spirit that will never be forgotten. Thank you for watching. If you or someone you know is in an unsafe situation, please know there is help available. You can reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline or local authorities. Please take care of yourselves and each other.